time for The Perspective with Mike Sherbino and Julie Stautland, where we tackle the serious and fun-loving sides of life. Today on the show, author, speaker, and global ambassador of the World Evangelical Alliance, Brian Stiller is here. He's just returned from Ukraine and will give us an update on what he witnessed with our brethren there in this illegal war Russia declared on Ukraine. Plus, over 2 years into the pandemic, a new study suggests yet again that Canadians are still suffering from anxiety and depression, and our children are suffering the most. Dr. Andrew Blackwood returns to give us tips on how to manage our own anxiety and the children also through these foggy and troubling times. So before we get to the difficult stuff ahead that we are all facing, here's Mike and Julie to first brighten your day.
Well, hey, we're glad you're with us today on The Perspective. I'm Mike Sherbino, and you would be Mitch Hunter.
That's me.
Okay, Mitch, I was looking at that one clip at the beginning where it talks about that new word, languishing. And that's a painful spot to be. And I think it's a good description of many people. But I want to ask you a question. When you're languishing, I'm not making fun of it, but
I languish sometimes.
Yeah, what do you do to chill out? That's your term, right?
Sure,
I hear you say that a lot, to chill out.
I'd use that term. And Mike here, and for the viewers at home, here's a little advice on chilling out. And I take it literal. I take a nice cold can of Coca-Cola, pour it in a glass, and I'm a music guy. I put the record on, get the needle on there, the music's there. I just sit back, and that's me chilling out.
Just chilling out.
But Mike, what about you? How do you chill out?
Well, I don't use the word chill out because I'm trying to be cool.
It looks different, okay.
But I like riding my motorcycle. I got this picture in my mind, I'm going about 100 clicks down farm field roads, and nobody's around. And you know what? I have a cup holder for my coffee.
That's good.
And I'm sipping on my coffee as I'm driving along, and that's kind of fun.
Right on.
But we want to take it one step further, and we are glad you're with us today. I don't know if you're having trouble chilling out or what your expression is. We got a special guest. He's a favorite on the program, Dr. Andrew Blackwood. And Coach Drew is going to be with us to talk to us more about chilling out, how to be cool, but especially how to handle the anxiety and the stress so that we don't languish any longer. Stay with us. Well, I'm excited today that Dr. Andrew Blackwood is with us again. We call him Coach Drew, and I call him other things as well because he's a real good friend. But we want to be pushing his book today. If pushing is the right word, it's a great book. I keep it on my close to my desk, and it's a reference point. It's called The Art of a Genuine Apology. And Mitch, when I'm not sure what to do, I go to this book, and it teaches me how to genuinely forgive you and to move on with life.
Mike, I'm still learning about apologies. I might have to pick up a copy.
Well, listen, let's bring Andrew on right now. And Andrew, we're so glad you're with us today. Thanks for letting us have a little bit of fun at your expense.
Oh, my pleasure. That's why I'm here.
That's why we're here. But Andrew, it is a fantastic book, and I thank God for you and what is in here. And so right out of the gate, I just want to say to people that if you want to get a free copy of Andrew's book, I would like to give it to you today. Just write to us here at The Perspective. Make sure you give us your name and correct mailing address, and we'll send that out to you courtesy of us as a gift to say thank you. Andrew, you know what? We're living in a strange time. Not even sure what normal is. I'm kind of even worn out using that word normal. Why are we having so much challenges dealing with the unknown? And how is it affecting us?
There are many reasons why we feel so, unstable. There are a lot of things that are destabilizing in our world these days. And it's bringing us in contact with a truth, a reality that there are some things that are beyond our control. The reality is a lot of the things that we've depended on for our livelihood and our sense of normalcy. I know you don't like that word much. Those things are being proven to be unreliable. they're not permanent, right? They are not the things that we are actually designed to be resting on. The only thing that is stable, as we will come to find, is God. So we're all uncomfortable with uncertainty. But it's in that moment of uncertainty where we are invited to say, okay, really, what am I leaning on? What is the thing that's sure for me?
Yeah, right on. So, Andrew, you talk about uncertainty, and there are so many things recently that have really showed people that life is uncertain. I think of the COVID-19 pandemic, the war in Ukraine. So, just talk to us. How does mental health, in the light of world events, how do world events affect people's mental health?
It can affect us in so many different ways, and it will depend on how exactly we are intersecting with these events. So, for someone who is right in the middle of a war torn country, and for somebody who's watching it on TV, the experiences are going to be very different. Now, it's not to minimize the experience of people who are not as directly connected, but it's good to be able to put it into perspective. So, the people that I'm dealing with at the moment, they're not actually experiencing war or famine or those sorts of things, but they're actually experiencing the trauma from witnessing and watching news clip after news clip, reading and hearing and being bombarded with these images. And while it's real and it's happening, the impact of seeing it every day, it's causing people to feel discouraged, depressed, and hopeless and afraid.
So, Andrew, when you say those words, and I think they're very appropriate words to describe a lot of times this languishing feeling that people are having, um, how do we communicate at home? Like, do we just, I think it's easy to shut down. I think at times I'm guilty, like, wow, I've heard so many things through the day. I'm a pastor. We've got conversations like this happening, and just prior to coming in here, I'm hearing about other crises. So it's easy just to shut down, and yet we all carry then our own stuff after work. Give us some tips on what we can do to keep our homes healthy.
Certainly. So the reality is, as stressful as life can be, we are designed to be able to deal with stress and to deal with life. And of course, we have God's help. The challenge for us is knowing how to remove ourselves where possible so that we can take care of ourselves, right? We're not designed to live beneath the weight of constant stress indefinitely. So, for people who have a habit or tendency to watch the news all the time, that's going to be a lot more difficult for them than somebody who rarely ever watches the news. Right? You're going to see the stark contrast between somebody who watches news daily, who's impacted by that, and then somebody else who watches the news rarely, but then gets informed by somebody who does watch the news, right? So it's going to be important to know how to take care of ourselves because people are different. My dad, he watches the news all day, every day, and he is not fazed by it. Myself, that's not a recipe for success for me. Like, it's important for me to not watch constantly so I can take better care of myself. So there are many things that we can do as part of our regular patterns of self-care, which is really, really important.
Right on. So, Andrew, you talk about, I think you use the phrase watching regularly, and I just wonder, particularly as social media becomes more and more prevalent and we're just bombarded with messages on all sides, I'm wondering, as times are changing, is mental health, are we more vulnerable to mental health challenges today, especially with social media, or do people pretty much stay the same throughout decades? What do you think?
I think, yeah, we are definitely more vulnerable to it because again, we're bombarded with images, but these are images that we are choosing to look at, right? Just because we're vulnerable doesn't mean that we have to stay that way. So it's really important that we are intentional, knowing ourselves well and taking good care of ourselves. So ultimately, when I start to think about the situations, and even as we're talking about this conversation, we're really focused on people who are really suffering. However, there's still a whole range of life experiences that are happening this moment. There are many people who are thriving. There are many people who seem to be, not impacted harshly by all that's happening right now, which invites me to think, okay, let's take a step back. Let's pay attention, because if we just pay attention to all the negative stuff, as real as it is, we're going to forget that there is a whole world of wonderful things that are happening. So what I like to think about is there's different, if you would imagine that life is on a spectrum, right? On one end we have existing, and then we can move up to coping, and then we have living, and then we have thriving. We have the opportunity to move along this spectrum and decide where we want to be. So a lot of the times we talk about coping, right? And coping is important, but coping doesn't lead to change necessarily. We can cope and just get by and then stay where we are, or we could actually use coping mechanisms that are meant to be short term, but then let's open ourselves to growth so we can move from just coping to actually living. And that's what we want to do. Even in difficult times, we want to learn how to live, how to move beyond just
I
coping.
like that. You know, Andrew, we're going to come right back after a short break, and I'd love for you to give us some of those tips on rising above the situation, just so that we're not just surviving, but we're actually thriving. Stay with us here on The Perspective. We're going to be back with Dr. Andrew Blackwood.
If you've offered an apology and you get the sense that something's missing, things still haven't quite come together, you're probably right. And the best thing that you can do is ask. Ask the person that you've hurt what's missing. See, now this is the fourth step of the genuine apology. It's also the most vulnerable step, the most vulnerable place you could be. But that's the place you want to be if you really want to bring healing to your relationships.
Well, we're back today with Coach Drew, and his book, The Art of a Genuine Apology, is something that I want to encourage you to get. Matter of fact, if you write to us at The Perspective, just click on the link. We will send you one as a free gift to you. Andrew, with so much pressure on families right now, and it's easy for things to explode at home, give us one thing out of your book that helps to facilitate reconciliation.
Oh, certainly. And I think it's relevant to our conversation today, Mike. The reality is, with all the stress, we are not usually at our best. So taking
Good
good care
point.
of taking good care of ourselves is going to be important. That said, what the art of a genuine apology really reminds us of is the fact that this apology is for the other person to take care of their healing and their wounds. However, in order to do that well, we first got to understand ourselves. So, as we think about what brought me to this place, why did I explode? What factors contributed to that? That will help us understand ourselves so that we can figure out, which is one part of the genuine apology, what are we going to do differently the next time? So, if we don't take the time to understand ourselves and be like, oh, okay, I haven't slept well for the past 4 nights, and that's connected to me having this unresolved issue over here. If we don't connect the dots, then we're going to continue, trying our best but still failing until we resolve this. So we want to be able to say, okay, this is really what's happening for me. And that way, when we are ready to offer the apology, we can include our plan of action. We're not going to explain to them why we did what we did, because they don't care. They don't want to know, right? It's going to sound like an excuse. There is a difference between an explanation and an excuse.
Yeah.
But when we understand for ourselves and we can say, you know what, this is what I'm going to do different. I offered an apology to my daughter this morning, right? I'm not perfect, but I can see, okay, this is what I could do differently. And this is what I'm committing to do differently. So, especially in times like this, it's really, really important to be able to heal emotional wounds.
Right on. So, Andrew, we'll just jump right into the interview. And you've just been talking about understanding ourselves. But I'm also saying I want to understand the people around me. And myself in particular, I work a lot with young adults. I work with youth. And sometimes I work with kids. So just tell us, give us some advice. What are some signs that a teen or a child is not doing well mentally?
Mm. Right off the bat, it really does depend on the youth. So some, it's pretty obvious to see a stark contrast in how they normally behave versus how they're behaving now. Because some people are more vibrant, some people are more open, some people are more engaging, they're more extroverted. And if you see a big change, then that might be an indication that something's going on for them. But I also think that it's important to look at, again, that continuum. It's pretty helpful to think about this in light of anyone at different stages of development, right? Are they living? Are they enjoying life? What's happening for them? Do they smile? Do they have things that they enjoy doing? Joy, the presence of joy is a really good indicator of mental wellness. If you don't see that joy, you don't see that happiness, you're probably going to see some other things
Okay, so
in your
Andrew, I
affect.
got to jump in. I got to jump in. Describe what joy looks like, because it can mean different things. It's kind of like nailing jello to a tree, I think, sometimes, to define it. When you say joy, is it just, bopping along, I'm happy? Because how does that then tie into us as adults as well?
Yes, for sure. So as I was watching my now 9-year-old drawing and coloring, she was so engaged, right? There was this sense of, yeah, I'm doing what I want to do, what I'm created to do. When we find ourselves enjoying life, there is a sense of rejuvenation that comes with that. And for her, it might be art. And for my other daughter, it might be dancing. There are things that people do. Some people it's reading, for some people it's walking. So when we access these things that are part of our makeup and what we do well, we experience joy. But if people don't have these things in their lives, they're not going to be able to do not only coping, but to also to experience life, the joy of life on a regular basis. So some of us as adults, we don't have things that we do that we don't have to do, right? It's all about the grind. It's all about what you have to do. And it's really, really important that we know ourselves well enough to say, okay, this is my limit for this, and this is my opportunity for this. I want to do this. I want to be engaged in this. So I think having joy and experiencing joy is not only possible, I think it's essential and a big part of our own mental wellness.
Right on. So Andrew, we're just in the conversation of mental health, and we're talking about how do we recognize signs that somebody else is struggling with mental health. We're talking about joy. Here's a question. It's important for me because I work with young people, but I think it's important for everybody, even watching at home, to monitor their own mental health, to monitor the mental health of those around them. So here's my question. There's a time where we want to say, I'll take care of myself, or I'll take care of these other people, but there does come a point where mental health, a person struggles so much that they need to seek professional help. So how do I look out for my own mental health? How do I look out for the mental health of others? When do I say we need to bring in a professional?
Certainly. I do appreciate that there are different roles and different degrees of support that we can offer. Beyond just knowing ourselves and doing the active things of taking stock, making a list, this is what I do on a regular basis, this is what gives me life. When we find ourselves stuck thinking life is never going to get better, right? Or we find ourselves perpetually sad or down or feeling depressed, it's really important that we get support. You don't want to wait until the point that you're thinking about ending your life or harming yourself. It's really important to be aware that, again, I'm not I'm not experiencing the best of life. And sometimes we get so accustomed to it that we think that that's normal, right? We think it's normal not to be happy, or we think it's normal to be stressed all the time, but it's not. So I personally think the sooner the better, get the
Good
support
point.
that you need, and don't wait until, you are totally broken down before you realize, okay, you know what, I could use some help. Because the truth is, we're not designed to do life alone. We have these ideas that in order to be strong, I have to do it all by myself. And, that's the definition of success for someone. But we're not designed to do it alone.
Andrew, we have about a minute left. Talk to me about your faith journey, because I know you're a follower of Jesus. What are the couple anchor points that you keep going back to for your own mental health?
Well, one of the things that I love doing is journaling. It's a form of prayer for me. And to I'm just as human as everybody else. So when I see things that cause me to feel powerless and helpless and not in control, I used to try to run away from those emotions. But as opposed to doing that, I'm learning to tolerate them and bring them into prayer and say, Lord, I'm feeling powerless. And as I listen for him and I receive his word for me in the moment, that is what helps me. I rely on his power and I rely on his strength and his word. And then I take that into these very real situations. So I come to these situations with a sense of hope. I'm not waiting for the situation to change to have hope. God brings us his word in the middle of our situation. So I use journaling to help me deal with those very real emotions based on the things that I see. So the way that I look at the world changes before
Wow.
the world even does. Yeah.
Good word and a good discipline for all of us to follow. I just want to thank you for being on the program today. I want to encourage our viewers to write to us at The Perspective. We'd like to send you a free copy of Dr. Blackwood's book, The Art of a Genuine Apology. It's a great tool to have. Keep it on your bedstand. Hey, Andrew, thank you for being with us. We love it when you're with us, Coach Drew. We'll talk to you again soon.
God can lead you just as clearly to act or to wait. Both require faith, perseverance, and trust.
Learning how to wait for God is just as important as doing great exploits for him. It can be just as difficult, even more difficult, because of our impatient nature.
If you want to be a faithful Christian, you have to be prepared to obey whether the task is exciting or frustrating.
Yesterday, as we began a series called Life's Healing Choices, we're looking at what is referred to as the Sermon on the Mount. It took place in Israel, and down by the Lake of Galilee, Jesus was sitting on a mountain and he was teaching the people. I mentioned yesterday that 3 years ago I got to go there, and as I was looking and envisioning what it must have been like, I think what really intrigues me is one of the things that Jesus was talking about. He was talking about how do we be happy? And in the midst of this COVID outbreak, in the midst of so much news media flashing to us that can raise our anxiety level, so much conflict, maybe you're wondering, how can I be happy? Actually, how can I find happiness is one of the 6 ultimate questions that Canadians ask. So let's just take that together and work with me as we unpack what Jesus was actually saying when he said, happy are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of God. I want to pause and say, really? Is that true? We talked about some things yesterday, but one of the reasons I mentioned that causes our unhappiness is that more often than we care to admit, you and I want to play God. And folks, we can't do that. You know, you say, well, what are you talking about? What was what Ezekiel said in chapter 28? That's a book in the Old Testament. He said, in the pride of your heart, you say, I am God. Now, you might not come out and say, I am God, but when you start to think, I'm in control, I can handle things. Let me just redo my day timer. Let me take a break. I was listening to an amazing presenter who is known all over North America, and she was saying, I've just got to take a hiatus for the next 4 months. I've got to take a break. Basically, what she was saying was, I'm burnt out, I'm dry, I can't hold it together. And yet she was the person that's counseling so many people. Not taking a pot shot at her, I'm just saying this, that if she has to take a break, do we not have to take a break? And why do we take a break? Because I want to be happy, I want to be healthy. But folks, when you and I play God, it falls by the wayside. A lot of times we try to control our appearances. We put on a mask, everything is okay. It's like we get on the elevator, oh, how are you? Fine, fine. And really we're dying inside. And sometimes we try to be happy by the way we control people. If I can control my environment, then it's all going to be fine. Or sometimes, you know what, it's our habit. And you have your go-to habit that you don't want to admit to, but saying, if I can just control that, if I can maybe regulate my eating or get some more exercise or not drink quite so much, then I'm going to be able to hold it all together. You see, there are consequences when you and I try to play God. Let me explain that. I think one of the consequences is that we're afraid that people will discover us for who we are. And sometimes we're just going to find ourselves emotionally and physically spent, trying to do so many things. You know, the Bible says this about David, who tried to do that in the Old Testament. He tried to cover up his affair and all the problems that came as a result of that. He said, "My strength evaporated like water on a sunny day until I finally admitted all my sins to you, and I stopped trying to hide them." When Jesus said, "Happy are the poor in spirit," I believe it means this. To be poor in spirit is to acknowledge our spiritual bankruptcy, that willpower is not enough, that good intentions are not enough, and you and I need another source of power, and that's God. I don't care who you are. You can be trying to cope and hold it all together, but folks, we need God. We need His help, and I want to invite you to go there. Don't be one of the people described in the book of wisdom literature, the book of Proverbs. It says, God mocks proud mockers, but get this, He gives grace to the humble. So how do I cultivate this poor in spirit attitude? I need to live in God's forgiveness, to know that as I repent to Him, He forgives me. He loves me for who I am. Listen to Proverbs 28. It says, you'll never succeed in life if you try to hide your sins. Confess them to God, give them up, and God will show mercy to you. And then live dependently on God. How do I do that? I need to nurture a life of prayer. I need to spend time with Him. Maybe to be so honest as to say, God, I can't do today on my own, but I'm inviting you into my space. Fill me with your joy and with your happiness.
Well, welcome back to The Perspective, everybody. And we just came back from a teaching time with Mike. And Mike, I'm just so encouraged by what you shared. You're saying, how do I take care of my mental health? And one of the things is, when I try to play God and I try to have things my own way and do it my way, that can lead to all sorts of stress. But then I think about in 1 Peter 5:7, when he writes, cast all your anxieties on Him, for He cares for you. And the idea then is that I don't go immediately and say, God, I trust you with all these things. Now I'm going to do it my way. The idea is, as I lay down my anxieties with God, I continue, I go and I submit to Him. And that, for me, has been so restful and encouraging my whole life.
You know, I think you've hit the nail on the head, Mitch, because that's where we have to all come in our journey to say, I'm going to surrender my mess. And when we give our mess to the Master, He is able to sort it out. He is able to do the miraculous, because after all, He's God, Mitch, not me.
That's right.
Or you.
Yep.